The sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, baking the earth until it cracked like broken promises. Red dust swirled across the frontier town of Redemption Creek, coating everything in a fine layer of rust-colored grit. In the distance, jagged mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their purple shadows the only respite from the relentless heat. Celeste Williams stood at the window of her small cabin, watching the dust devils dance across the barren landscape. Her dark hands, roughened by years of labor, gripped the weathered windowsill. At 26, she was already a widow. Her husband Thomas lost to consumption 2 winters past. The modest patch of land they'd worked together was all she had left. That, and the crushing weight of debts her parents had accumulated before yellow fever took them both. A cloud of dust announced riders approaching long before she could make out their forms. Her stomach tightened. She knew who it would be. Samuel Morrison dismounted first, his expensive boots hitting the ground with practiced authority. The town's most prominent creditor. He owned half the businesses in Redemption Creek and held notes on the other half. Behind him, 3 men remained mounted, hands resting casually near their holsters. Mrs. Williams. Morrison touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "I trust you know why we're here." "The payment isn't due for another week," Celeste replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Circumstances have changed." Morrison produced a document from his coat. "Your father borrowed against future harvests. With the drought this year, I'm calling in the full amount, $800, due immediately." $800. It might as well have been 8,000. Celeste's small vegetable garden and 3 chickens barely kept her fed, let alone profitable. "I need time. Time's up." Morrison's pale eyes swept over her modest home. "Though perhaps we could work out an arrangement. You're still a handsome woman, despite your unfortunate heritage." Celeste's spine stiffened. She'd rather die than accept what he was suggesting. "I'll get your money by sundown tomorrow, or I take the land." Morrison remounted his horse. "Don't test me, girl." After they left, Celeste sank into her late mother's rocking chair. The cabin felt smaller than ever, its 2 rooms suddenly suffocating. On the mantel, a faded photograph of her parents stared back at her. They'd been born free, had worked themselves to death trying to build something in this unforgiving land. She couldn't let it all be for nothing. That evening, Celeste made her way to Murphy's saloon. The rough-hewn establishment sat at the center of town, its bat-wing doors swinging with the constant traffic of cowboys, miners, and drifters. She paused outside, gathering courage. What she was about to do went against everything her mother had taught her about dignity and self-respect, but dignity didn't pay debts. The saloon fell quiet as she entered. A Negro woman in Murphy's was unusual enough. One unaccompanied was unheard of. Celeste kept her head high as she approached the bar where Murphy himself was wiping glasses. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly. "Privately." Murphy, a grizzled Irishman who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything, nodded toward a back room. "This way." In the dim office, Celeste laid out her proposition. Her voice barely wavered as she explained her debts, Morrison's ultimatum, and her desperate solution. She would sell her labor contract to whoever would pay enough to clear the debt. 7 years of service in exchange for $800. Murphy's bushy eyebrows rose. "That's indentured servitude. Girl, it ain't exactly legal since the war." "Neither is Morrison stealing land from folks who can't fight back," Celeste countered. "Will you help me or not?" After a long pause, Murphy nodded. "I'll put the word out, quietly. But Celeste," his voice softened, "you sure about this? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I'm sure." The auction, if it could be called that, took place 3 nights later in Murphy's back room. Celeste stood against the wall, fighting the urge to run as 5 men examined her like livestock. She recognized some from town, the Watson brothers who ran cattle, old Hiram the blacksmith, and 2 strangers whose leering grins made her skin crawl. 7 years of household service, Murphy announced. Cooking, cleaning, tending garden, Nothing more. He emphasized the last words with a hard look at the assembled men. Bidding starts at 800. 850. One of the strangers called out immediately. 900, countered Watson Elder. As the bidding climbed, Celeste forced herself to remain still. Each increase in price should have made her feel more valuable, but instead, she felt smaller, more diminished. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Hold your head high, child. You're descended from queens. 1,200, the stranger bid, licking his lips. 1,500. The new voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a tall man leaning against the frame, his weathered face partially hidden by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Dust covered his long duster coat, and a well-worn coat hung low on his hip. Well, Murphy brightened. Luke Hawthorne, didn't expect to see you in town. Luke stepped into the light, revealing sun-weathered features and steel-gray eyes that swept the room with quiet authority. He was perhaps 35, with the lean, hard look of a man who'd spent his life working cattle under the unforgiving sun. 1,500, he repeated, producing a leather pouch that landed heavy on the table. Gold coin. The stranger started to protest, but Luke's steady gaze silenced him. There was something in those eyes, not threat exactly, but a promise that he was not a man to be crossed lightly. Murphy counted the coins, nodded. Sold. As the others filed out, grumbling, Luke approached Celeste. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the calluses on his hands. Working hands. Honest hands. She hoped. Ma'am, he said quietly, we should go. Celeste gathered her small bundle of possessions. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, the photograph from the mantel, and her few personal items. Everything she owned in the world fit in a single flour sack. Outside, Luke's horse waited alongside a sturdy bay mare. Can you ride? He asked. A little. He helped her mount with surprising gentleness, his touch brief and respectful. As they prepared to leave, Morrison emerged from the shadows. Well, he sneered. The Negro woman sold herself to pay her debts. How fitting. Luke's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. The debt's paid. Morrison, that's all that matters. For now. Morrison's smile was cold. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. As they rode out of Redemption Creek under a canopy of stars, Celeste allowed herself one look back. The town that had been her whole world seemed small and mean in the darkness. Ahead lay only uncertainty, traveling with a stranger who now held papers on 7 years of her life. Why? She finally asked as they followed the moonlit trail. Why did you buy my contract? Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Maybe because I know what it's like to be cornered. Maybe because Morrison's had it coming for a long time. Or maybe... He glanced at her. Maybe because I could see you're a fighter, and fighters deserve a chance. They rode in silence after that. 2 strangers bound by paper and circumstance, heading into the vast darkness of the frontier. Behind them, Redemption Creek slept fitfully, unaware that this transaction would set in motion events that would change everything. The night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and despite her fear, despite the uncertainty that gripped her heart, Celeste felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was tiny, fragile as a newborn flame, but it was there. She had saved her parents' land. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage that had brought her this far. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, as they disappeared into the darkness of the wild frontier. The trail stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of dust winding through sagebrush and scattered rocks. The sun climbed higher, transforming the landscape into a shimmering furnace. Celeste pulled her bonnet lower, grateful for its meager shade, though sweat still trickled down her spine. They'd been riding for 3 days now, stopping only to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Luke maintained a steady pace, always alert, his eyes scanning the horizon. He spoke little, But his actions revealed a considerate nature, ensuring she had water first, choosing shaded spots for their brief rests, keeping a respectful distance when they made camp. On the fourth day, the landscape began to change. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient bones, and the trail grew treacherous with loose stones. Luke slowed their pace, guiding his horse with practiced ease. "Storm coming," he said, pointing to dark clouds massing on the horizon. Celeste had learned to read the weather in this harsh land, but these clouds looked different, angry, yellow-tinged, moving with unnatural speed. "Sandstorm." Luke confirmed her fears. "We need shelter." He spurred his horse to a faster gait, leading them toward a cluster of rocks in the distance. The wind picked up, carrying the first stinging particles of sand. By the time they reached the rocks, the storm was almost upon them. Luke quickly located a deep overhang, almost a shallow cave, carved by wind and time into the red stone. They led the horses inside just as the storm hit in full force. The world disappeared behind a curtain of flying sand and debris. "Get back from the entrance," Luke shouted over the howling wind. He pulled blankets from his saddlebags, using them to create a barrier for the horses. The animals pressed against the back wall, eyes rolling with fear. Celeste huddled against the stone, her dress whipping around her legs despite the shelter. Sand found its way into everything: her mouth, eyes, the folds of her clothing. Luke pressed a bandana into her hands. "Cover your face," he instructed, tying his own around his nose and mouth. The storm raged for hours. In the relative safety of their shelter, an awkward intimacy developed. They sat close enough to share warmth against the dropping temperature. Yet Luke maintained a careful distance, never presuming. "Why were you in Redemption Creek?" Celeste finally asked, needing conversation to distract from the storm's fury. Luke was quiet for a moment. "Selling cattle. Heard about the auction from Murphy." He shifted uncomfortably. "Didn't sit right with me." "So you bought me out of charity?" The words came out sharper than intended. "No." His gray eyes met hers steadily. "I bought your contract because Morrison and men like him have too much power, because I've seen what happens to women who fall into the wrong hands, and because—" He paused, looking away. "Because everyone deserves a choice, even when it seems like there aren't any. But I'm still bound to you for 7 years. The contract says 7 years." Luke agreed. "But contracts can be amended. Once we reach my ranch, we'll discuss terms that suit us both. I need help, that's true, but I'm not looking for a slave." The word hung between them, heavy with history and meaning. Celeste studied his face, searching for deception but finding only sincerity. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally. A small smile softened his weathered features. "It's not much. Couple 100 acres up in the high country. Good grass, reliable water. I run maybe 50 head of cattle. Few horses. It's isolated. Nearest neighbor is a day's ride. But it's peaceful. A man can think up there." "Just you?" "Just me." A shadow crossed his face. "Had a partner once, but he died 2 winters back. Been making do since then. But it's hard. Ranch needs tending, and I can't be in 2 places at once." As the storm began to abate, Celeste found herself reassessing this quiet man. His hands were gentle with the horses, his manner respectful, his words measured. Perhaps she hadn't traded one prison for another after all. When they finally emerged from shelter, the landscape had transformed. Drifts of sand created new contours, and familiar landmarks had vanished. Luke studied the sky, calculating direction from the sun's position. "Trail's gone," he said, "but I know the way." They continued their journey, now through a world remade by wind and sand. The horses picked their way carefully through the altered terrain. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the air grew cooler, scented with pine. That evening, they made camp beside a small spring. Luke had shot a rabbit along the trail, and Celeste prepared it with wild onions she'd spotted growing near the water. It was their first hot meal in days, and they ate in companionable silence. "You cook well," Luke observed. "My mother taught me." Celeste stared into the fire. "She said a woman should know how to make something from nothing, Guess she was preparing me for this. Tell me about her. The invitation surprised Celeste. Most white folks had no interest in her history. Slowly, she began to speak of her parents, her father, born free in Pennsylvania, who'd come west with dreams of land ownership, her mother, whose parents had bought their freedom and passed on stories of ancestors from across the ocean. They met in St. Louis, she continued. Mama was working in a boarding house. Daddy was heading west with a freight company. He said he took one look at her and knew he'd found his reason to settle down. Luke listened without interrupting, feeding small sticks to the fire. When she spoke of their struggles, the droughts and failed crops, the hostility of neighbors who resented their presence, his jaw tightened, but he remained silent. They never gave up, Celeste concluded. Even when the debts piled up, even when folks told them to go back where they came from, that land was their dream made real. And now it's yours, Luke said quietly. Morrison can't touch it. The debt's paid in full. Thanks to you. She met his eyes across the fire. I still don't understand why you'd risk so much for a stranger. Luke poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. My mother was Irish. Came over during the famine. I remember the stories. How people treated her. The signs saying, "No Irish need apply." She used to say that suffering should make us kinder, not harder. He paused. When I saw you in that room, standing proud despite everything, I saw her strength. Couldn't walk away. A coyote howled in the distance, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. Luke automatically checked his rifle, then settled back. We should reach the ranch by tomorrow evening, he said. It's not fancy, but it's solid. You'll have your own room in the house. I bunk in the barn mostly anyway. Easier to tend the stock. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His tone brooked no argument. Whatever that paper says, you're a lady, and you'll be treated as such under my roof. That night, Celeste lay in her bedroll staring at the stars. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt the possibility of a future beyond mere survival. This strange, quiet man had given her more than freedom from debt. He'd given her dignity, respect, and perhaps even hope. The next day's ride took them higher into the mountains. The desert gave way to grassland dotted with wildflowers. Pine and aspen groves provided blessed shade. The air grew thin and sweet, carrying the sound of running water. As they crested a final ridge, Luke pulled up his horse. There it is. Below them spread a valley of golden grass bisected by a silver stream. A modest log cabin nestled against a stand of pines, with a barn and corral nearby. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and horses raised their heads to watch the newcomers. It's beautiful, Celeste breathed. Luke's face softened with pride. It's home. He glanced at her. You're home now, too, for as long as you choose to stay. As they descended toward the ranch, Celeste felt something shift inside her chest. The fear and uncertainty of the past days began to ease. This wasn't what she'd expected when she'd stood in Murphy's back room, selling away 7 years of her life. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was what she needed. The sun was setting as they reached the cabin, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Luke helped her dismount, his hands steady and sure. Welcome to the Double H Ranch, he said simply. Celeste looked around at the peaceful valley, the solid cabin, the vast sky fading to purple above. For the first time in months, she smiled, a real smile, not the mask she wore for others. Thank you, she said, and meant it with all her heart. The Double H Ranch revealed itself slowly to Celeste over her first weeks, like a book opening page by page. The cabin, built of sturdy pine logs, consisted of 3 rooms, a main area with kitchen and living space, Luke's bedroom, which he'd immediately vacated for her use, and a small storage room. True to his word, Luke had moved his belongings to the barn's loft, fashioning comfortable quarters among the hay bales. Each morning, Celeste woke to the sound of Luke already at work, the ring of his hammer on metal, the creak of the corral gate, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to the horses. She'd dress quickly and start breakfast, watching through the window as he moved about his tasks with quiet efficiency. The work was hard but satisfying. She tended the vegetable garden behind the cabin, coaxing life from the mountain soil. The chickens Luke had acquired from a neighboring ranch became her particular charge, and she found unexpected pleasure in their contented clucking as she scattered feed. Inside, she transformed the bachelor quarters into something resembling a home, curtains at the windows, wildflowers in a jar on the table, the floor swept clean. Luke never demanded, only suggested, "If you have time, the fence by the stream needs attention," or "the horses would appreciate a kind word while I'm away." He treated her labor as valuable, thanking her for meals, noticing improvements she made to the household. It was the third week when the first test came. Luke had ridden to the Thornton Ranch, a day's journey north, to help with branding. Celeste was alone, working in the garden, when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, white men, travel-worn and rough-looking. Her heart hammered as they descended toward the cabin. Luke had left a rifle by the door, loaded, with simple instructions. "You see trouble coming, don't hesitate." The lead rider, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth, dismounted at the gate. "Well, looky here," he called to his companions. "Appears Hawthorne's got himself some colored help." Celeste straightened from her work, hoe still in hand. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Gentlemen, she says." The man laughed. "That's rich. Where's Hawthorne?" "Away on business. He'll return tomorrow." The 3 men exchanged glances that made her skin crawl. The leader took a step closer. "Maybe we'll just wait for him then. Inside, where it's comfortable." "The ranch doesn't welcome uninvited guests," Celeste said firmly, though her mouth had gone dry. "Is that so?" The man's eyes narrowed. "And what's a woman like you doing giving orders on a white man's property?" Celeste began backing toward the cabin, the hoe gripped tight. The other 2 men had dismounted now, spreading out to flank her. She calculated the distance to the door, to the rifle. "I work here," she said. "Mister? Hawthorne expects—" "I bet he does." The leader leered. "Bet he expects all kinds of things from you." She ran. Behind her, boots pounded on packed earth. Her fingers closed on the door handle just as rough hands grabbed her arm. She swung the hoe with all her strength, catching her attacker across the jaw. He cursed and stumbled back. Celeste burst through the door, lunging for the rifle. The leader was right behind her. She spun, bringing the gun up, and his forward momentum stopped abruptly. "Get out," she commanded. Surprised by the steadiness of her voice, the rifle's weight felt reassuring in her hands. "Now, you won't shoot." The man sneered, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I buried my husband 2 years ago," Celeste said quietly. "I've got nothing left to lose except my life, and I'd rather die than let you lay hands on me. So yes, I'll shoot. The question is whether your friends will be burying you today." Long seconds ticked by. Blood dripped from where the hoe had split the man's lip. Finally, he raised his hands and backed away. "This ain't over." He spat. "Hawthorne's gonna hear about this. A man ought to keep better control of his property." "I'm nobody's property," Celeste replied. "And if you come back, I'll be ready." She kept the rifle trained on them until they mounted and rode away, disappearing over the ridge. Only then did her hands begin to shake. She sank into a chair, the rifle across her lap, and remained there until she heard Luke's horse approaching near sunset. He took in the scene, the rifle, her trembling hands, the overturned garden tools, and his face darkened. "What happened?" Celeste told him, watching his jaw tighten with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You did well," he said finally. "Better than well, but I should have been here. You can't be everywhere." She echoed his words from the sandstorm. "I handled it." "That you did." Something like pride flickered in his eyes. Those were the Colton brothers. They've been trouble since they arrived last spring. I'll ride to town tomorrow. Make sure they understand they're not welcome here. I don't need you fighting my battles. It's not about need. Luke interrupted gently. It's about what's right. You're under my protection. Celeste, that means something out here. That evening, he insisted on taking supper in the cabin rather than the barn. They ate in companionable silence, both processing the day's events. As Celeste cleared the dishes, Luke spoke. I'll teach you to shoot properly. The rifle. And a sidearm, too. A woman alone needs to be able to defend herself. I'd like that, Celeste admitted. Their routine shifted after that. Each evening, after the day's chores, Luke instructed her in firearms. She proved a quick student, her hands steady, her eye true. He taught her to ride better too, to handle a horse with confidence on the rough mountain terrain. The work itself became a partnership. Luke showed her how to mend fences, treat sick cattle, read weather signs. In return, she brought order to his chaotic existence, meals at regular times, clothes mended, the cabin warm and welcoming when he came in from the cold. Neighbors began to take notice. When Luke brought her to town for supplies, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer. Men muttered behind their hands. But Jake Martinez, who ran the general store, always treated her with courtesy, and his wife Maria sometimes slipped an extra bit of ribbon or thread into her purchases. They'll get used to it, Luke said on one such trip, loading supplies while Celeste endured the stares. Will they? She asked quietly. They'll have to. His tone left no room for argument, but the isolation wore on her. At her parents' farm, she'd at least had occasional contact with other colored families, a small church to attend, familiar faces who understood her struggles. Here, she was utterly alone except for Luke. One evening, as autumn painted the aspens gold, she found herself crying silently while preparing supper. Luke entered unexpectedly. He'd forgotten his gloves and froze at the sight of her tears. What's wrong? Concern roughened his voice. Nothing. Everything. She wiped her face with her apron. I'm grateful. Don't think I'm not. But sometimes the loneliness. Luke shifted uncomfortably. He'd never been good with women's tears, but something in her dejection moved him. There's a family about 2 days south, the Washingtons. Free colored folks. Been homesteading there for 5 years. I've been meaning to ride down, check if they need anything before winter. Would you like to come? Celeste's face transformed. Really? Really? We'll go next week. Stay a couple days if they'll have us. The trip to the Washington homestead was like sunshine after months of clouds. Samuel and Ruth Washington welcomed them warmly, their 3 children chattering excitedly at having visitors. Ruth and Celeste bonded immediately, starved as they both were for female companionship. You're good for him, Ruth told Celeste privately as they prepared meals together. Sam says he's never seen Luke so settled. He's been kind to me, Celeste replied carefully. Ruth studied her shrewdly. Kindness is a good foundation. The rest can grow from that, if you let it. The visit refreshed Celeste's spirit. She returned to the Double H with new energy, new recipes from Ruth, and the promise of regular correspondence. Luke seemed lighter too, as if her happiness had lifted some weight from his shoulders. One evening shortly after their return, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, Luke taught her to rope. She was laughing at her clumsy attempts when he moved behind her, adjusting her grip on the lariat. For a moment, they stood pressed together, his hands over hers, and time seemed to pause. She could feel his breath on her neck, sense the sudden tension in his body. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. Try again, he said roughly. Remember, it's all in the wrist. But something had shifted between them, subtle as the turning of seasons. Their evening lessons became charged with unspoken awareness. Their conversations by the fire lingered longer. When their hands accidentally touched passing dishes or tools, neither pulled away quite as quickly as before. Winter's approach brought new urgency to ranch work. Together they brought the cattle down from high pasture, repaired the barn roof, laid in supplies. Working side by side, they developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs without words. One afternoon, struggling with a particularly stubborn fence post. Celeste let loose a string of curses that would have scandalized her mother. Luke's startled laugh rang across the meadow. "Why, Miss Celeste?" he teased. "Such a language," she grinned, unrepentant. "You try wrestling this monster into place." Together they managed it, and as they stood catching their breath, Luke studied her. Sweat beaded her brow, dirt smudged her cheek, and her hair had escaped its pins. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "What?" she asked, self-conscious under his gaze. "Nothing," he said softly. "Just, you belong here. This land suits you." That night, as early snow began to fall, Celeste stood at her window watching the flakes dance in the moonlight. The Double H had become home in ways she'd never expected. And Luke had become something she didn't quite dare name yet. But winter was coming, and with it, new challenges that would test the fragile trust they'd built. In the distance, wolves howled, and Celeste shivered, not from cold, but from the prescient sense that their peaceful interlude was coming to an end. The first snows of winter had settled deep in the valley when the rumors reached them. Luke returned from town one December afternoon, his face grim beneath the frost-rimed brim of his hat. "What is it?" Celeste asked, looking up from the harness she was mending by the fire. He hung his coat slowly, choosing his words. "Talk in town. About us. About you." "There's always talk." She kept her voice light, but her hands stilled on the leather. "This is different." Luke accepted the coffee she poured, wrapping his cold fingers around the mug. "Someone's been stirring folks up, saying things about what goes on here, saying I'm keeping you against your will, that the contract isn't legal." Celeste's jaw tightened. "The Colton brothers?" "Among others. But they're getting bolder. Sheriff Watson warned me there's been whiskey talk about riding out here, setting things right, as they put it." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, wind howled through the pines, rattling the windows. The cabin that had become their sanctuary suddenly felt vulnerable. "Maybe I should go," Celeste said quietly. "Return to Redemption Creek until this settles." "No." The word came out harsher than Luke intended. He set down his mug, running a hand through his hair. "That's not... You belong here. Celeste, this is your home." "Is it?" She met his eyes. "Because according to that paper, I'm just hired help. 7 years of labor, nothing more. You know that's not true." "Do I?" Years of hurt and uncertainty spilled into her voice. "You've been kind. Luke, kinder than I had any right to expect. But at the end of the day, you hold paper on me same as Morrison held paper on my father's debts." Luke flinched as if she'd struck him. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Snow swirled in the gathering dusk, and he watched it without seeing. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said suddenly. "Fever took her and our son. He was 3 days old." His voice was steady, but Celeste could see the tension in his shoulders. "I came out here to forget, to lose myself in work and solitude. For 5 years. That was enough. Then I saw you in that room, standing proud while those men bid on you like cattle, and something I thought was dead stirred inside me." He turned to face her. "I didn't buy your contract to own you. Celeste, I bought it to free you, but somewhere along the way, I became the one who was trapped. Every day, watching you bring life back to this place, seeing your strength, your grace." He stopped, struggling for words. "The contract means nothing. Burn it if you want. Stay or go as you choose. But know this, you've never been property to me. You've been everything else." Celeste stood slowly, the harness falling forgotten to the floor. "Luke!" A sound outside cut her off. Horses. Several of them. Approaching fast. Luke's hand went immediately to his rifle. "Get back," he ordered. But Celeste was already moving, grabbing the shotgun from its place by the door. They doused the lamps, taking positions by the windows. In the snow-muffled darkness, torches appeared. 6 riders, faces masked with bandanas. The Colton brothers' voices carried clearly on the wind. Hawthorne, send out the woman and we'll leave peaceful like. Luke's answer was to chamber around, the sound carrying clearly in the cold air. Any man sets foot on my property uninvited won't be leaving at all. She don't belong here, another voice shouted. It ain't natural, ain't right. What's not right is 6 armed men threatening a woman. Luke called back. Turn around now, while you still can. Drunken laughter greeted this. You gonna take all 6 of us, Hawthorne? For what, a colored woman who ain't even yours? The lead rider, emboldened by whiskey and numbers, spurred his horse forward. Luke's rifle cracked, the bullet kicking up snow inches from the horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. Next one goes through you, Luke warned. But the men spread out, surrounding the cabin. Celeste's heart pounded as she watched shadows move through the trees. These men hadn't come to talk. I count 3 on my side. She whispered. 3 here too, when I give the word. Glass shattered as a rock flew through the window. Cold air and snow swirled in. Then came the torches, arcing through the night toward the cabin's wooden walls. Now, Luke shouted. They fired simultaneously. Celeste's shotgun boomed, the buckshot scattering the riders on her side. Luke's rifle spoke twice more in rapid succession. Shouts and curses filled the air as horses reared and men scrambled for cover. One torch had caught on the woodpile. Smoke began to fill the cabin. Celeste grabbed a bucket of water, dousing the flames while Luke continued to hold off the attackers. The barn! Someone shouted outside. Fire the barn! Luke cursed. The horses were in that barn, including Celeste's gentle mare. Without thinking, he burst through the door, rifle blazing. Celeste followed, shotgun ready. What happened next would be debated in town for months. Some said Luke Hawthorne fought like a man possessed, moving through the snow like a ghost. Others claimed the woman showed unholy courage, standing her ground against mounted men. What everyone agreed on was the outcome. When Sheriff Watson arrived with a posse, drawn by reports of gunfire, he found 3 wounded men, 2 dead horses, and Luke Hawthorne standing guard over Celeste Williams. Both of them singed and bloodied, but very much alive. They attacked us, Luke said simply. We defended ourselves. Watson surveyed the scene, the bullet holes, the scorched wood, the scattered torches. His weathered face was grim. Any witnesses? Just us, Luke replied. The sheriff studied them for a long moment. He'd known Luke for years, respected him, and the woman, well, she'd proven herself tonight. Self-defense, Watson declared finally. Clear case of it, you boys. He addressed the wounded men. Are under arrest for attempted arson and assault. Those of you who can ride are going to jail. The rest. He shrugged. Better hope the doc's sober tonight. As the posse departed with their prisoners, Watson lingered. This won't be the end of it, he warned quietly. Men like that have friends, and memories are long out here. I know, Luke said. But some things are worth fighting for. Watson's eyes flicked to Celeste, who was calming the frightened horses. I reckon they are, he agreed. You two take care. In the aftermath, as they surveyed the damage and tended their wounds, an odd peace settled over the cabin. The attack had crystallized something between them, burned away pretense and uncertainty. You could have been killed, Celeste said, dabbing at a cut on Luke's forehead. So could you. His hand caught hers. But you didn't run. You stood and fought. It's my home, too, she said simply. You said so yourself. Luke studied her face in the lamplight. The determined set of her jaw, the fierce pride in her eyes, the way she held herself despite exhaustion and fear. Celeste, She pressed a finger to his lips. I know, she whispered. I know. He kissed her then, there in the smoke-damaged cabin with snow swirling through broken windows. It was a kiss that spoke of loneliness ended, of courage recognized, of love born from respect and forged in fire. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Stay, Luke said simply. Not because of any contract, not for 7 years. Stay because... He struggled. then gave up on words, kissing her again instead. "The town will never accept it," Celeste warned when she could speak. "There'll be more trouble." "Let them come," Luke said fiercely. "I'm done hiding what I feel, done pretending you're anything less than the woman I love." The word hung between them, momentous and irreversible. Celeste touched his face wonderingly. "You love me?" "From the moment you faced down the Colton brothers with nothing but a hoe and pure courage," he admitted. "Maybe even from that first night in Murphy's, when you held your head high though your world was falling apart. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Celeste Williams. And if you'll have me," she silenced him with another kiss, pouring all her answer into that simple touch. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the damaged cabin, two hearts found shelter in each other. Later, as they worked side by side to board up the windows and clean the debris, Celeste found herself humming. Luke paused in his work to listen, a smile playing at his lips. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just, I haven't heard music in this house in 6 years." She crossed to him, taking his hands. "There'll be music again," she promised. "And laughter, and life. We'll rebuild. Luke, not just the cabin, everything." He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. Through the remaining window, stars appeared between racing clouds. The storm was passing, leaving the world clean and new in its wake. Together, he agreed. Whatever comes, we face it together. In town, word spread quickly about the fight at the Double H. Opinions were divided, arguments fierce, but at the ranch, Luke and Celeste worked on rebuilding and preparing for winter, their bond stronger for having been tested. The contract that had brought them together lay forgotten in a drawer, superseded by something far more binding, a love that had grown from respect, bloomed in adversity, and would endure whatever trials lay ahead. Winter descended on the Double H with a vengeance that year. The snow fell heavy and relentless, transforming the valley into a white wilderness that seemed to exist outside of time. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of white, and the wind howled like a living thing, searching for ways through the cabin walls. Luke had seen hard winters before, but this one tested even his experience. By late January, the snow stood higher than the fence posts. The temperature plummeted so low that breath froze in the air, and any exposed skin burned with cold. The cattle huddled together in the lee of the barn, their backs crusted with ice. "We're losing them," Luke said one brutal morning. Returning from the barn, ice crystals clung to his beard, and his face was gray with exhaustion. Found 2 more frozen in the north pasture. Celeste helped him out of his frozen coat, her own hands numb despite the gloves. They'd been fighting this battle for weeks now, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling hay through chest-deep snow, trying desperately to keep the animals alive. "How many does that make?" she asked quietly. 12 head, maybe more buried under the drifts. Luke slumped into a chair by the fire. "If this keeps up, we'll lose half the herd." She poured him coffee, adding a precious splash of whiskey from their dwindling supply. "What about the hay?" "Running low. What we cut last summer wasn't enough for a winter like this." He scrubbed his face with his hands. "I've been a fool. Celeste, should have prepared better, should have—" "Stop." She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "No one could have predicted this weather. Even the old-timers in town say they've never seen worse. That won't save the cattle, or us, if we run out of food." It was a real fear. Their trips to town had ceased when the snow made the trail impassable. They were rationing everything now: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. Celeste had become creative with their meals, stretching supplies with wild game Luke managed to shoot and the preserves she'd put up in autumn. But she knew, as he did, that they were one disaster away from serious trouble. "We'll manage," she said firmly. "We always do." That night, the blizzard struck with renewed fury. The wind screamed around the cabin, and snow piled against the door so fast they had to dig it out every few hours to prevent being trapped. In the barn, They could hear the cattle lowing in distress. "I have to check on them," Luke said, reaching for his coat. "Not alone." Celeste was already bundling up. "We go together or not at all." He started to protest, then stopped. They'd learned to work as a team these past months, each watching the other's back. Pride had no place in survival. They tied a rope between themselves and the cabin door, in the whiteout conditions. It would be easy to become disoriented and lost, just yards from shelter. The journey to the barn, normally a minute's walk, took 15 minutes of struggle against the wind. Inside, they found chaos. The cattle, panicked by the storm, had broken through a section of fence. Several had wandered into the far corner where the roof had partially collapsed under snow weight. A young heifer was trapped beneath a fallen beam. "Hold the lantern!" Luke shouted over the wind. Together they worked to free the animal, Celeste using a pole as a lever while Luke lifted. The heifer, wild with fear, thrashed and kicked. One hoof caught Luke in the ribs, sending him sprawling. "Luke!" Celeste dropped the pole, rushing to him. "I'm fine," he gasped, though she could see the pain in his eyes. "Help me up. We need to move them before more of the roof goes." Working through pain and exhaustion, they herded the cattle to the safer section of the barn. Celeste found hay in the loft, forking it down while Luke reinforced the damaged wall with spare planks. By the time they finished, both were trembling with cold and fatigue. The journey back to the cabin became a nightmare when the rope, weakened by ice and strain, snapped halfway. In the white blindness, they clung to each other, stumbling through drifts, guided more by instinct than sight. When Celeste's legs gave out, Luke half carried her the remaining distance. They burst through the door in a shower of snow and ice, collapsing on the floor. For long minutes, they lay there, breathing hard, still clutching each other. "Your ribs," Celeste managed finally. "Your hands," Luke countered, seeing the blood where the rope had cut through her gloves. They helped each other to the fire, peeling away frozen layers. Luke's side was already purpling with bruises. Celeste's hands were raw and bleeding. They tended each other's wounds in silence, the intimacy of care speaking louder than words. "We could die out here," Celeste said quietly as she wrapped his ribs. "This winter could kill us both." "Maybe." Luke caught her hand, holding it gently despite her injuries. "But I can't think of anyone I'd rather face it with." She laughed, surprising them both. "Only you could make freezing to death sound romantic? Woman, you've ruined me," he said with a mock severity. I'd have been perfectly happy dying alone and miserable. Now you've got me wanting to live just to see what you'll do next." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of cold and struggle. They lost more cattle, but saved others through sheer determination. When the hay ran dangerously low, Luke remembered an old trapper's shelter higher in the mountains where he'd cached emergency supplies years ago. The journey there and back took 2 days through conditions that would have killed less determined souls. It was during the worst of the storms that Celeste fell ill. It started as a cough, progressed to fever. Luke watched helplessly as she burning up despite the cold, delirious with fever dreams. "Don't you dare," he whispered fiercely, bathing her face with cool cloths. "Don't you dare leave me now." For 3 days, he never left her side. He spooned broth between her lips, kept the fire blazing, held her when the chills shook her body. He talked to her constantly about the ranch, about spring, about the life they'd build together when this winter finally ended. "I was going to wait," he told her, still firm. "Do this proper, with a ring and words planned out. But if you can hear me, Celeste Williams, I want you to know, I aim to marry you, if you'll have me, soon as the preacher can get through the pass. Want to wake up next to you every morning legal and proper. Want everyone to know you're my wife, not my employee. Want to give you my name and build a family and grow old watching sunsets from that porch I keep promising to add to the cabin." On the 4th day, her fever broke. She woke to find Luke asleep in the chair beside the bed, his hand still holding hers. He looked haggard, unshaven, exhausted. "You look terrible," she whispered. His eyes flew open. Celeste, thank God. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by your entire herd. She squeezed his hand weakly. Did you mean it? Mean what? What you said about marriage? Color rose in his weathered cheeks. You heard that? Every word. She managed a smile. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Luke Hawthorne. Though you might want to ask again when I don't look like death warmed over. He kissed her then, gentle and fierce all at once. You're beautiful, he said. Death warmed over and all. The fever had taken much of her strength, but slowly, Celeste recovered. The storms began to ease. Though the snow remained deep, they'd survived the worst. Though the cost was evident in their dwindling supplies and reduced herd. One morning in late February, Luke woke to something he hadn't heard in months. Silence. The wind had finally stopped. He peered outside to see clear skies and sunshine turning the snow-covered valley into a glittering wonderland. Celeste, he called softly. Come see. She joined him at the window, wrapped in a blanket. Together they watched the sun rise over a transformed world. The worst was behind them. They'd faced winter's fury and emerged scarred but unbroken. We did it, she breathed. We did. Luke agreed, pulling her close, though I don't fancy doing it again anytime soon. She laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. Next winter, we'll be better prepared. More hay, more supplies. More hands to help, Luke added. I'm thinking of hiring some men come spring. Ranch this size needs more than 2 people, even 2 as stubborn as us. Can we afford it? After the losses this winter? Barely, but we'll make it work. We always do. Celeste leaned into his warmth, watching an eagle circle high above the valley. They'd been tested by fire and ice, faced death and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges spring might bring, they'd meet them together. I love you, she said simply. And I love you. Luke replied, more than I knew a man could love. You've brought me back to life, Celeste, given me something to fight for besides just surviving another day. In the barn, the remaining cattle lowed, hungry for their morning feed. There was work to be done, always work. But for just this moment, they stood together in the doorway of their battered but solid home, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, and knew that the worst was over. They'd survived winter's trial. Now it was time to build the life they dreamed of through all those dark, frozen nights. Spring would come, as it always did, and with it, new challenges and new hopes. But they would face it all together, bound by love forged in hardship and tempered by trust. The winter had nearly broken them. Instead, it had made them unbreakable. Spring arrived slowly that year, the snow retreating grudgingly to reveal a valley scarred by winter's violence. Luke and Celeste worked from dawn to dusk, repairing damaged fences, tending to the surviving cattle, and planning for the season ahead. It was during this hopeful time that the past returned to darken their door. The rider appeared on a morning when wildflowers were just beginning to push through the mud. Celeste was hanging laundry when she spotted him, a lone figure picking his way carefully down the trail. Something about his bearing, the expensive cut of his coat despite the trail dust, sent alarm through her. Luke, she called quietly. He emerged from the barn, took one look at her face, and reached for his rifle. But as the rider drew closer, Celeste recognized him with a sinking heart. It wasn't one of the Colton brothers or their ilk. It was worse. It was Josiah Morrison, Samuel Morrison's father, the wealthiest and most powerful man in 3 counties. Morrison dismounted at the gate, his cold eyes surveying the ranch with proprietary interest. 2 more riders appeared on the ridge behind him, hired guns, their purpose clear. Mr. Hawthorne. Morrison touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. Mrs. Williams, I believe we have business to discuss. Luke stepped forward, rifle casual but ready. State your business and be on your way. Direct, I appreciate that in a man. Morrison produced a leather portfolio. I've come about my son's interests. It seems there was an irregularity in the transaction that brought Mrs. Williams to your employment. The debt was paid in full, Luke said flatly. Your son has no claim here. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Morrison's smile was thin as winter ice. You see, I've been reviewing my son's records. The original debt was to my company, not his. Samuel exceeded his authority in accepting your payment, which means— He paused for effect. The debt remains valid, with interest. It now stands at $1,200. Celeste felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's not possible. The contract was never legally binding. Morrison interrupted. A side deal made in a saloon back room, no proper witnesses, no legal documentation. Any court in the territory would void it instantly. What do you want? Luke's voice was dangerous now. Morrison's eyes glittered. What I've always wanted, the Williams land in Redemption Creek. It sits on the best water rights in the county. I'll forgive the debt in exchange for the deed. Otherwise— He gestured to his men. I'll be forced to collect what's owed, one way or another. Get off my land, Luke commanded. Your land today. Morrison agreed. But for how long? I own judges, Mr. Hawthorne. I own sheriffs. I can make your life very difficult. Loans called in, cattle prices manipulated, unfortunate accidents. He looked meaningfully at Celeste. Such a dangerous country for a woman, especially one of her background. Luke raised the rifle. I said, get off my land. Morrison chuckled, unperturbed. 3 days. Mrs. Williams, bring me the deed to your parents' homestead, or I'll take what's mine through legal channels. And if that fails— He mounted his horse with practiced ease. Well, the law is a flexible thing out here. They watched him ride away, his men following like shadows. When they were gone, Celeste sank onto the porch steps, her mind racing. He can't do this, she said. Can he? Luke sat beside her, his face grim. Morrison owns half the territory's politicians. If he says the contract isn't valid, then I'm not free. The words tasted bitter. Everything we've built, everything we've survived, none of it matters if he can just take me back. No. Luke's voice was fierce. I won't let that happen. You can't fight the law, Luke, not when he owns it. They sat in heavy silence, the morning's brightness dimmed by Morrison's threats. Finally, Luke stood. Get your riding clothes. We're going to town. What for? To see Judge Harper. He's the only honest judge within 100 miles. If anyone can help us, it's him. The ride to town was tense, both of them constantly checking their back trail. But they arrived without incident, finding Judge Harper in his small office above the bank. Abraham Harper was a thin, scholarly man who'd come west for his health and stayed for the challenge of bringing law to lawless places. He listened to their story without interruption, occasionally making notes. Show me the original contract, he said when they finished. Luke produced the document from Murphy's saloon. Harper studied it carefully, then sighed. Morrison's partially right. This wouldn't hold up in territorial court. It lacks proper witnessing and notarization. Celeste's heart sank, but Harper raised a hand. However, there's another issue. Morrison claims the debt was to his company, not his son. Do you have any documentation of the original loan? My father's papers, Celeste said. They're back at the homestead in Redemption Creek. Get them, Harper advised. If they show the debt was to Samuel, not Josiah, then Samuel had every right to accept payment. Furthermore, he pulled out a law book, flipping through pages. There's precedent here. The Homestead Act provides certain protections. If you can prove continuous occupation and improvement of the land, Morrison can't simply seize it for debt. But I haven't been there, Celeste protested. I've been here, working to pay the debt that threatened it. Harper countered. That could be argued as protecting your interest. It's thin, but it might work. He closed the book. Gather all documentation. I'll prepare a legal response. But be warned, Morrison plays dirty when he doesn't get his way legally. They left town with mixed hope and dread. That night, around their fire, they made plans. "I'll ride to Redemption Creek tomorrow." Celeste decided. "Get the papers." "We'll ride to Redemption Creek," Luke corrected. "I'm not letting you face that town alone." "It's a 2-day ride. What about the ranch?" "I'll ask Tom Martinez to look after things. His boy needs work experience anyway." Celeste studied his determined face. "This isn't your fight. Luke, Morrison wants my land, my father's debt. You could walk away from all of this." "Could I?" He took her hands. "Tell me, Celeste, could I wake up tomorrow knowing I'd let him take you? Could I build a life here knowing I'd failed you when it mattered most?" He shook his head. "This stopped being just your fight the moment you became part of my life. Hell, probably the moment I saw you in that saloon." Tears pricked her eyes. "I've brought you nothing but trouble. You've brought me everything worth having," he corrected. "Now stop trying to protect me and let me protect you for once." They set out at dawn, provisioned for trouble. The journey to Redemption Creek passed without incident, though both remained watchful. As they crested the final hill, Celeste's breath caught. Below lay her childhood home, the small cabin, the garden plot, the fields her parents had worked. "It's smaller than I remembered," she said softly. The cabin was dusty but intact. While Luke stood guard, Celeste searched through her father's papers. She found what they needed. Loan documents clearly showing Samuel Morrison as the creditor, not his father's company. "This should do it," she said, clutching the papers. A sound outside made them both freeze. Luke peered through the window and cursed. "Riders comin'. 6 of them." Morrison had anticipated their move. The riders surrounded the cabin, and Morrison himself dismounted, flanked by his hired guns. "I thought I might find you here," he called. "Come out, and let's discuss this like civilized people." They had no choice. Luke kept his hand near his gun as they emerged. Morrison smiled coldly. "Find what you were looking for." "The proof that your son had full authority to accept payment," Celeste said, holding the papers tight. "The debt is cleared. Papers can be lost," Morrison observed. "Destroyed. Accidents happen." One of his men struck a match meaningfully. "Copies exist." Luke lied smoothly. "In the judge's safe. Burn these, and you prove our case for us." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You're cleverer than I gave you credit for. Hawthorne, but cleverness won't save you. I've decided I want more than just this land. I want you gone. Both of you. The sight of you two together offends decent folks. The only offensive thing here is you," Luke replied. "Using law and money to steal what you can't earn honestly." Morrison's face darkened. "Careful, boy. I could have you shot where you stand." "You could," Luke agreed. "But you won't. Because you're a coward who hides behind hired guns and legal tricks. You want us gone? Come and move us yourself." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Morrison laughed, a sound without humor. 3 days, he said. "Use them wisely. After that, I stop being civilized." They watched him leave, neither speaking until the dust settled. "We need to get back to Harper," Luke said. "File those papers before Morrison can interfere." But as they prepared to leave, Celeste took one last look around her childhood home. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad I got to see it again." Luke pulled her close. "You'll see it many more times. This isn't over." "No," she agreed, steel in her voice now. "It's not Morrison wants a fight? He'll get one. My parents didn't build this place for it to end up in the hands of a man like him." They rode hard back to town, filed the papers with Judge Harper, and prepared for whatever Morrison would throw at them next. 3 days. It wasn't much time, but they'd faced worse odds. Winter hadn't broken them. Morrison wouldn't either. That night, safe back at the Double H, they made plans and preparations. Friends were contacted, ammunition stockpiled, legal strategies discussed. When Morrison came, they'd be ready, no matter what happens, Luke said as they lay together in the darkness. I want you to know that these months with you have been the best of my life. Don't talk like that, Celeste whispered. We're going to win. We're going to build that life we dreamed about. We are, he agreed. But if something happens to me, she silenced him with a kiss. Nothing's going to happen. We've come too far to lose now. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. 3 days. The countdown had begun. The town had changed in the months since Celeste left. As she and Luke rode down Main Street, she noticed new faces, subtle shifts in attitude. Where once there had been only cold stares and whispered comments, now she caught glimpses of something else. Curiosity, even cautious respect. At Martinez's general store, Maria greeted her warmly. Celeste, we heard about the trouble with Morrison. That man's had it coming for years. Other customers nodded agreement. Old Mrs. Patterson, who'd never acknowledged Celeste before, actually smiled. You stood up to those Colton boys. My husband says that took real courage. The transformation wasn't complete. Some still turned away. Others muttered disapproval. But something had shifted. Their fight for survival through the winter. The attack they'd weathered together. Morrison's overreach, it all combined to paint them in a different light. People are talking, Jake Martinez told Luke while loading supplies. Morrison's pushed too hard lately. Foreclosed on the Hendersons last month. Tried to buy out the water rights from 3 other ranches. Folks are getting tired of it. Judge Harper was even more direct when they stopped at his office. Morrison's made a mistake targeting you two. The story spread a war widow trying to save her parents' land. A respected rancher standing by her. It's caught people's imagination. Will imagination stop bullets? Luke asked grimly. No, but it might bring help when you need it. Harper leaned back in his chair. I've filed injunctions, but Morrison owns too many judges. Legal channels will only slow him down. You need to be ready for other approaches. They were back at the ranch. Luke had transformed the property into a defensive position. Tom Martinez and his son Miguel were there, along with 2 other hands Luke trusted. Ammunition was stockpiled, sightlines cleared, supplies laid in. But Celeste had her own plans brewing. I want to start a school, she announced one evening, causing Luke to nearly choke on his coffee. Now, with Morrison threatening us? Especially now. Her eyes sparked with determination. The Washington children need education. So do the Martinez kids, the Hendersons boys. If we're fighting for this land, let's make it worth something. Luke studied her, then slowly smiled. You're going to teach children while preparing for a siege. Why not? Life doesn't stop for men like Morrison. So she did. Using the main room of the cabin, Celeste started teaching letters and numbers to a handful of children whose parents were brave enough to send them. The sight of mixed groups of children, Mexican, black, and even a few white, learning together sent its own message through the valley. It was young Miguel Martinez who brought the warning on Morrison's 3rd day. He'd been hunting rabbits in the high country when he spotted them, 20 riders, moving through the back passes. They're avoiding the main trail, he panted. Coming around behind the ranch. Luke sent the boy to town for the sheriff while organizing their defense. But Celeste had another idea. The church bell, she said. If we could ring it, alert the whole valley. The church is in town. We'd never make it. Not the town church. The old mission bell at Shepherd's Point. She'd seen it on their rides. An abandoned Spanish mission halfway between the ranch and town. It might still work. Luke started to protest, then stopped. If Morrison attacked without witnesses, he could claim anything afterward. But if the whole valley heard the alarm, Miguel, he called. Can you reach Shepherd's Point without being seen? The boy nodded eagerly. Within minutes, he was gone, slipping through the shadows like smoke. They didn't have long to wait. As the sun touched the western peaks, Morrison's men appeared. Not 20, but closer to 30, spreading out to surround the ranch. Morrison himself rode in the center, confident in his numbers. Hawthorne, he called. Send out the woman and the papers. This is your last chance. Luke's answer was to step onto the porch, rifle ready. Celeste joined him, her mother's Bible in one hand, a shotgun in the other. The hands took positions at windows and behind cover. Morrison's face darkened. "You'd die for this, for her. Every day and twice on Sundays." Luke replied calmly, "Then you're a fool." Morrison raised his hand to signal the attack. That's when the bell began to ring. The sound echoed across the valley, bronze and ancient, calling out alarm as it had centuries before. Morrison's men shifted nervously. That bell meant witnesses, meant the whole valley would know what happened here. "Attack!" Morrison shouted. But hesitation had infected his men. These weren't hardened killers, just hired guns used to intimidating unarmed farmers. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. Over the ridge rode Sheriff Watson with a proper posse, not just deputies, but ranchers, townsfolk, even some who'd sneered at Celeste months before. The bell had done its work. "Morrison!" Watson's voice carried clear. "Stand down. Any bloodshed here you'll answer for." "I'm collecting a legal debt," Morrison protested. With 30 armed men, Watson positioned his people strategically. "Looks more like a lynch mob to me." Judge Harper pushed through on his old mare, waving documents. "I have here a federal injunction against any action regarding the Williams property until the territorial court reviews the case." Morrison's face went purple. "You can't." "I can, and I have." Harper's mild voice carried surprising authority. "Furthermore, I've been in contact with the federal marshal's office. They're very interested in your business practices, Mr. Morrison. Something about forged documents and claim jumping." The standoff stretched taut. Morrison's men looked between their employer and the growing crowd of witnesses. Several quietly holstered their weapons. Then Samuel Washington rode up with his family and several other black homesteaders. The Martinezes arrived with their extended clan. Even some of the white ranchers who'd initially shunned Luke positioned themselves clearly on his side. "Seems like the whole valley's here," Watson observed. "All watching. You sure you want to do this, Morrison?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Morrison wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Samuel Morrison, Josiah's son, riding up with several well-dressed men. "Father, enough. These are federal attorneys. I've given them full access to our company records." "Samuel?" Morrison's voice cracked. "What have you done?" "What I should have done years ago." The younger Morrison looked exhausted but determined. "I'm tired of the threats, the schemes, the people hurt for profit. It ends now. You ungrateful." "The debt to Mrs. Williams is cleared." Samuel continued, ignoring his father's rage. "I have full authority as a company partner, and I'm exercising it. All claims are dropped." He rode forward, stopping before Celeste and Luke. "I apologize for my father's actions, and for my own. What happened at Murphy's, I'm ashamed of my part in it." Celeste studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Morrison made one last attempt. "You'll regret this, all of you. You'll leave," Watson interrupted. "Tonight. The federal marshals will be here tomorrow, and I doubt you want to be around for that conversation." Surrounded by hostile faces, abandoned even by his son, Morrison had no choice. He spat in the dirt, then spurred his horse viciously. His hired men scattered, eager to distance themselves from their fallen employer. As the dust settled, an awkward silence fell. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached Luke and Celeste. "Was wrong about you two," Henderson muttered, not quite meeting their eyes. "You've got grit." Others nodded agreement or touched their hats in acknowledgement. It wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was a beginning. Samuel Morrison lingered. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Your parents, Mrs. Williams, they didn't die in debt. My father manipulated the books, added charges that never existed. I'll testify to that if needed." The revelation hit Celeste like a physical blow. All the struggle, all the sacrifice, based on a lie. Luke's arm around her shoulders kept her standing. "Thank you for telling me," she managed. After Samuel left, Judge Harper approached. "With his testimony and the documents he's provided, you'll have grounds for a substantial lawsuit. Morrison's empire is finished." But Celeste shook her head. "I don't want his money. I just want to be left in peace." As the sun set and the last riders departed, Luke and Celeste stood alone on their porch. The crisis had passed, the threat ended, but both felt the weight of change in the air. "They'll never fully accept us," Celeste said softly. "Maybe not," Luke agreed. "But they'll respect us. That's enough." She turned in his arms. "Is it? Is it enough for you?" "You're enough for me," he said simply. "The rest is just noise." In the days that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Morrison fled the territory steps ahead of federal warrants. His son took over the business, implementing fair practices that shocked longtime residents. The children returned to Celeste's informal school, their numbers growing. One afternoon, as Celeste taught arithmetic to a mixed group of eager faces, she looked up to find Luke watching from the doorway. His expression held such pride and love that her voice faltered mid-lesson. Later, as they prepared dinner together, he said, "I think we should add that room onto the cabin, for the school. That's a big project." Tom Martinez offered to help. Said his kids are learning more in a week with you than they did in a year before. Luke paused, then added carefully, "Maybe we should build extra rooms while we're at it, for future needs." Celeste felt heat rise in her cheeks as she understood his meaning. "That's presumptuous, Mr. Hawthorne. We're not even married yet." "About that," Luke said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But I realized something today. With you, every moment is right." The ring was simple but elegant, a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "She was a fighter too, came west in a wagon train, buried 2 husbands, raised 6 kids alone. I think she would have liked you." "Luke," Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because of any contract or obligation, but because I can't imagine a life without you. Because you've made this empty land into a home. Because—" She silenced him with a kiss that was answer enough. When they finally parted, both were breathless and laughing. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She held out her hand for the ring, watching it catch the light. "Though people will talk." "Let them talk," Luke said fiercely. "We've earned our happiness." That night, as they made plans for their wedding and their future, the bell at Shepherd's Point rang again, not in alarm this time, but in celebration. As young Miguel practiced his newfound skill, the sound carried across the valley, announcing to all who could hear that sometimes, against all odds, love and justice prevail. The Double H Ranch stood strong against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warmth and promise. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds continued building a life together, one day at a time, one season at a time, one shared dream at a time. The morning dawned clear and golden over the Double H Ranch, painting the mountains in shades of rose and amber. It had been 3 months since Morrison's defeat, and the valley had settled into a new rhythm, where once there had been tension and hostility. Now there was a cautious peace, even acceptance. Celeste stood at the window of the expanded cabin, watching Luke and the hands work with the horses in the corral. The building had grown over the summer, new rooms added for the school, a proper kitchen, and the promised porch where they spent evenings watching the sun set behind the peaks. "Mrs. Hawthorne," a small voice piped up. "Is this right?" She turned to find little Ana Martinez holding up her slate. Arithmetic problems carefully worked out. The child was one of 12 students who now attended the school regularly, children of all backgrounds learning together in defiance of convention. "Perfect," Celeste smiled, ruffling the girl's dark hair. "You're getting faster with your multiplication." The school had become more than just a place of learning. It was a symbol of change in the valley, proof that different peoples could work together, that the future didn't have to repeat the past's mistakes. "Riders coming," Miguel called from his lookout post, a duty he'd taken on himself after the Morrison incident. Celeste moved to the window, then relaxed. It was the Washington's wagon, with Sheriff Watson and Judge Harper riding alongside. They were expected guests, coming for a celebration that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. Luke met them in the yard, helping Ruth Washington down from the wagon. Samuel Washington clasped Luke's hand warmly, their friendship having deepened through shared trials. "Beautiful day for it," Watson commented, surveying the transformed ranch, where once there had been merely functional buildings. Now there were flower gardens, painted shutters, and children's laughter filling the air. "Celeste's doing," Luke said proudly. "She's got a gift for making things grow. Plants, children, hope." Judge Harper smiled. "Speaking of hope, I have news. The territorial legislature passed the education bill. Integrated schools will now be legally protected, and they're looking for qualified teachers. I may have mentioned Mrs. Hawthorne's name." Inside, Celeste received the news with mixed emotions. Official recognition of what she'd built here was wonderful, but it would mean scrutiny, challenges from those who still opposed such changes. "We'll face it together," Luke said simply, reading her concerns, like always. As the day progressed, more neighbors arrived. The Martinezes brought food and music. The Hendersons, who'd lost their farm to Morrison but regained it after his fall, contributed fresh bread and preserves. Even some of the formerly hostile ranchers appeared, drawn by curiosity and the promise of Martinez's famous barbecue. It was Tom Henderson who brought the news that changed everything. "Lightning strike," he panted, having ridden hard from the north pasture. Fire spreading fast, winds pushing it this way. The celebration transformed instantly into organized action. Men grabbed tools and formed bucket brigades. Women gathered children and began moving valuables to safety. The unity that had been growing all summer crystallized into immediate cooperation. Luke took charge, dividing the men into groups. "Tom, take riders to the neighboring ranches. We need everyone. Miguel, ride to town for help. The rest of us start cutting a fire break." Celeste organized the evacuation, ensuring children and livestock were moved to safety. But as the smoke grew thicker and the orange glow appeared on the horizon, it became clear the fire was moving faster than expected. "The wind's shifting," Samuel Washington observed grimly. "It's going to jump the creek. If the fire jumped the creek, it would race through the valley, destroying everything in its path, the ranch, the school, the homes of everyone who'd come to help. Not if we stop it first," Luke declared. "We need to set a backfire, rob it of fuel." It was dangerous. If the wind shifted again, they could trap themselves between two fires. But there was no choice. Working together, black, white, Mexican, all distinctions erased by necessity, they cleared a wide strip of land and set controlled fires. Celeste found herself beside Mrs. Patterson, both beating at spot fires with wet blankets. The older woman, who'd once crossed streets to avoid her, now worked shoulder to shoulder without hesitation. The main fire approached like a living thing, roaring and consuming. Smoke filled the air, making breathing difficult. Through the chaos, Celeste saw Luke directing efforts, his face blackened with soot, but his voice still strong. Then, disaster! A burning tree fell, trapping young Ana Martinez. Without thinking, Celeste plunged into the smoke. The heat was overwhelming, flames licking close. But she reached the terrified child and pulled her free just as Luke appeared with others to drag the tree aside. "That was foolish," he said roughly, holding her tight even as he scolded. "That was necessary," she corrected, passing Anna to her tearful mother. The battle continued through the night, just when it seemed the fire would overwhelm them. Their backfire strategy worked. The two fires met in a spectacular wall of flame. Then, finding no fuel, began to die. As dawn broke, exhausted firefighters surveyed the damage. The north pasture was gone. Some fencing destroyed, but the homes, the school, the barn, all stood intact. They'd saved the valley through cooperation and courage. Sheriff Watson, his face a mask of soot and sweat, looked around at the mixed group of firefighters. If someone had told me a year ago I'd see this valley working together like this, I'd have called them crazy. Maybe that's what it takes, Judge Harper observed. A common enemy to show us we're not enemies to each other. As people began to disperse, many paused to shake Luke's hand or nod to Celeste. The shared danger had broken down barriers that might have stood for years otherwise. Maria Martinez hugged Celeste tightly. You saved my Anna. We won't forget. We saved each other. Celeste corrected. All of us. In the days that followed, the community came together to repair the damage. Neighbors who'd barely spoken now worked side by side. The school reopened with even more students, parents having seen Celeste risk her life for a Mexican child. One evening, as Luke and Celeste sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the fire-scarred mountains, he took her hand. I've been thinking about what Judge Harper said, about you teaching at the territorial school. And I think you should do it. This valley's changing, but there are other valleys, other communities that need what you can give. Celeste studied his face. It would mean time away, traveling to different schools. Then I'll come with you when I can, and keep the home fires burning when I can't. He smiled at the unintended reference to recent events. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't run into any more burning buildings. She laughed, leaning into his warmth. I make no promises. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Celeste reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate night in Murphy's saloon to this moment of peace and possibility, it seemed like a lifetime and yesterday all at once. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Taking on my troubles, fighting my battles? Luke turned her to face him. The only thing I'd regret is if I'd let you walk out of that saloon with anyone else. You've given me more than you know. Celeste, a purpose beyond just surviving, a reason to fight for better, a home that's more than just walls and land. You gave me the same, she said softly, and more. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first fireflies of evening dance across the meadow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still those who opposed change, still battles to be fought for equality and justice. But tonight, in this moment, they had peace. The sound of laughter drifted from the bunkhouse where the hands were sharing their evening meal. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The night wind carried the scent of grass and possibility. And Celeste knew that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as they had everything else, together, with courage and with love. Luke stood, pulling her up with him. Come on, Mrs. Hawthorne, early day tomorrow. Every day's an early day on a ranch, she reminded him, but followed willingly. As they entered their home, their true home, built not just of logs and stone but of shared dreams and hard-won respect. Celeste paused to look back at the valley spread below. The burn scars were visible even in moonlight, but so was new growth already beginning. Life persisted, hope endured, and love conquered even the harshest frontier. Are you coming? Luke called from inside. Yes, she answered, and meant it in every way possible. She was coming home, to the life they'd built, to the future they'd face, to the man who'd seen her worth when the world tried to diminish it. The door closed behind her, lamplight spilling briefly into darkness before the curtains were drawn. On the porch, the rocking chair Luke had made for her swayed gently in the breeze, waiting for tomorrow's sunset, tomorrow's conversations, tomorrow's dreams. The Double H Ranch stood solid against the night, no longer just a bachelor's lonely outpost, but a beacon of what was possible when courage met compassion, when love transcended prejudice, and when two people refused to let the world's darkness extinguish their light. In the morning, there would be work. There was always work. But there would also be children's voices in the schoolroom, neighbors helping neighbors, and the continuing transformation of a community learning to see beyond color to character. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still demanding. But it was also changing, one heart at a time, one kindness at a time, one act of courage at a time, and at the center of that change, in this small valley beneath the eternal mountains, Luke and Celeste Hawthorne continued to build something larger than themselves, a legacy of love that would outlast the hardships that had forged it. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to humanity's struggles and triumphs. And in their light, the promise of dawn waited, patient and certain, just beyond the horizon. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the American frontier. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you are. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and adventure from the untamed territories. Share your thoughts about Luke and Celeste's story. Did their journey touch your heart as it did mine?